Hey everyone, my name is Felix. I'm the co-founder here at ADPList. Very excited to be hosting all of you here today for another Slack and ADPList partnered exclusive session. So today we have someone very special joining us from Slack, and he's the director of product design at Slack. His name is Adil, and he has been at Slack for a couple of years right now, I believe about 2. And he'll be sharing something that I believe is, rarely talked about. There's not a lot of books written about it or videos out there, and he's going to use his personal journey to share with us his story about if you should be considering jumping into a management role, or if you should continue staying in your IC role if considering that you are an IC right now. Ideo has previously worked at Uber and Apple, notably, and he has led the design at Apple for the iTunes product. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ideo, but that's what I read. And then at Uber, he has managed teams across places like the marketplace team, Shared Rice, which is Uber Pool, Uber Rewards, subscription and promotion. So he's incredibly experienced with designing consumer products. So with that said, I'll pass my time over to Adil to begin his presentation, or he can share a little bit more about himself. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks Adil for being here with us. So excited to get started.
Hi everyone. I'd like to first thank Felix and ADPList for giving me the opportunity to be here and to share my experience. And hopefully I can share some words of wisdom and when it makes sense to make the switch or to stay in the IC track. So here is the rough plan for the next 45 minutes. We'll go on a career journey, my career journey, and kind of how I've made the numerous switches to management and away from management as well. After that, I put together something that will hopefully make it easier to help you decide on when to make the switch. And then we'll go into my favorite part, the Q&A, where we can have more of a discussion. So before diving in, just a little bit about my background. As Felix mentioned, I'm at Slack right now. I've been there for about 2 years, and I currently manage one of the growth teams. So we have 3 growth teams, and so I manage one of them. And personally, my partner and I have 2 young boys, and we recently moved to Austin. I lived in the Bay Area for almost 15 years, didn't quite make the 15-year mark. But it was an amazing journey there, and now I'm in Austin, and I'm liking it a lot, especially the breakfast tacos, which surprisingly are available pretty much everywhere, even in gas stations. But I have yet to have one at a gas station soon. As you can tell, maybe from my photo there, I'm a huge table tennis fan. As most of my friends growing up played soccer and basketball and tennis and all that, I chose table tennis, and so I've been playing for about 20 years, and it's a huge passion of mine. And I'll do a quick shameless plug. If you're interested in hearing about the connection between design and table tennis, there's an article or an interview that I did when I was at Uber, so you can probably find it online somewhere. And I really enjoy staying active by running and strength training, mostly to keep up with my 2 energetic boys. All right, let's get started. So I want you to think about your career as a book. So each chapter has its own story, and one chapter leads into the next, and so on. And so something to think about is like, what story are you writing right now? And what's the next story you want to write? So this framing has really helped me personally make the decision between switching to and away from management at different points in my career. All right, so let's go on a career journey. So back in 2007, I joined Palm as an intern. I did that for a typical 3 months, and that led into a full-time position as an individual contributor, also known as an IC. So talking about the differences a little bit first. So an individual contributor typically has no direct reports, so nobody's reporting to you. Your scope as an individual contributor could vary depending on the team size and the company that you're at. You're at a small company, you probably own the entire product. You're at a bigger company, maybe it's just a certain part of it, like onboarding. And And as an individual contributor, you're directly responsible for the work. Keyword here is responsible. So you're actually doing the work. Then we talk about managers. So managers have direct reports. Their scope of what they're responsible for or what they're accountable for covers a larger area. And typically there's less design work, if at all. And they're, like I mentioned, they're accountable for the team's work and career planning and performance reviews. And then you kind of find a place in the middle where there's this position of being the lead. So you might have 1 or 2 direct reports, or maybe dotted line reports. And so the difference between direct and dotted line is mostly around the org chart and who you actually report to, and maybe who is a little bit more accountable for the work that you're given or working on. Your scope covers a large area as a lead. And not only are you responsible for your own work, but you're accountable for the work of others. And I think what's important to note here is the difference between responsibility and accountability. So as an individual contributor, you are responsible for the pixels, for the designs, for delivering, for working with engineering to launch and get your experience out into the world, into the hands of your users. Whereas once you get into more of the management track, you're doing way less, if any, of the pixel work, and now you're accountable for it. Your measurement of success as a manager is largely due to what your team produces and how you help them produce the greatest outcomes working together. So now let's go back to Palm. So when I joined Palm, I joined a pretty small design team. It was about 8 people, so pretty small. And then we had a huge growth phase, and within 6 to 8 months, we grew to 45. And then there was 2008, and then we'd had to downsize. But that time when we went from 8 to 45, the team grew really, really big across all disciplines within design. And so there was this opportunity on the team that I was part of to switch to management. So my manager at the time, his design team had grown to, I want to say 12, 13 people. So it's a lot to manage. And so being on the team, he asked me if I wanted to do it. And this is like a year and a half out of school. So I was like, sure, I'll be a manager. That's great. And I would consider this an early career transition. And so I took on a team of 9 front-end developers. These days, they're more likely called design engineers or UI engineers or design prototypers, someone who's like who has a really good design sense, but also can code and can produce production level code. And so the front-end developers, the design engineers, were part of the design team. And so all of us were working on the design team. And I have a background in computer engineering. And so it kind of makes sense, but there's a lot of questions that kind of pop through my head, making such an earlier career switch to management. So the biggest one was, what could I teach them? Was there much that I could teach them? I've been out of school for like a year and a half. Will they even respect me? And what if they ask me something that I don't know the answer to? Remember, I was pretty young during this time. I was in my early 20s. And so all these questions were popping through my head as I was taking on this big team where every single person has more experience and is older than me as well. And then the biggest question that kind of came to mind at that point was, could I raise the quality bar of the team? Could I help them be better versions of themselves? And could I help them work together? And at that time, the answer was no. It was not a good time for me because although I had the foundational and people skills and I could make sure that they were happy and match up their skills to projects, I didn't have much experience actually shipping products, iterating, leveraging research, collaborating with people from diverse backgrounds, point of views, and life experiences. I just wasn't ready to continue doing that. So I switched back to IC. Then after Palm, I went on to join a small little startup, 10-person startup called OneID. The mission of the company was to create passwordless login across the internet. Pretty big mission. I was the only designer there. And then there's a lot of work that was needed. So we hired a freelancer. And so I was starting to learn how to delegate work, starting to work with someone else and figuring out how to split up the work. And then I also got a lot of exposure to the C-suite and strategic company conversations, which was great. But again, going back to management, moving to management did not occur to me at all. I was gaining experience and I was enjoying that. Then I went to Beats Music. And it was nice to be part of the design team again. The team was about a dozen people, but I was still the one with the least amount of experience. And so I wasn't really mentoring anybody. I was learning a lot from them. But what I started doing is that after being there for a little bit is I started going into what I would consider more areas of leadership. So looking at the processes, looking at how we're working with engineering team, how we're getting things out the door, how are we iterating? And so looking for opportunities to improve those processes, looking at building a design system, creating interaction patterns. And the other thing that I was really drawn to was team health and building culture. So making sure the team feels like they can connect to each other at a personal level, doing creative exercises together. That all was really important to me. And so I kind of took on that initiative. And I would consider these under the realm of leadership. And I don't think that you need to be a manager to be a leader at all. And so when I was at Beats Music, I was part of an interaction design team. And so there's 3 of us on there. And as the team grew larger and larger, we needed a manager for the team. So what happened? The most senior and tenured designer became the manager. Whether that person wanted to be a manager or not, I don't know. That person became the manager. Then from Beats Music, I went on to, we got bought, and I was working on the iTunes team at Apple. So now I'm part of a bigger team, more exposure to leaders, more exposure to amazing designers. Again, still no thought of switching to management. Because honestly, I was getting a lot of energy from doing the work myself. That was just where I was, my passion was there, and I was just getting a lot of energy. So from there, from Beats and Apple, I went on to Uber. And this is where I was able to continue to hone my craft and really work a lot more cross-functionally. Unlike Palm and Apple, which were very, very design-led, Uber was a lot more PM-led. And so there was a lot of emphasis on data and metrics, looking at company objectives, business metrics. That was a lot more important. And so I started learning how to collaborate more with engineers and product managers and other functions. And I was also at that time, when I joined the team, it was the design team was about 120 at Uber. And by the time I left, I think it was around 300 plus. It's a pretty large design team. And so you're surrounded by very senior designers, leaders, but I was no longer the most junior designer. I was somewhere in the middle. And so now I was able to mentor younger designers, run learning and development workshops, which was great, and really take the experience that I had at other companies and teach and give back. So while I was at Uber, there was a small team that was starting to form that was trying to take on loyalty, and they needed a designer. And so my manager found that that team was perfect for me. So he put me on that team, and I was the only designer. But what we were starting to build was a rewards program, and we needed a lot more people. And so we started getting more designers on the team, growing and growing. And so instead of going into management track, I was able to become a lead and lead a team of designers, of 3 to 4 designers. And also during my time at Uber, I had an intern every summer that I was able to manage and mentor. And so that, I feel like, is a great way to dip your toes into management, where you're taking your time and thinking about, okay, how do I do my work? And then how do I work with someone else and make sure that they have what they need in order to accomplish their goals? So one of the, about halfway through my time at Uber, there was a very intentional conversation that I had with my manager. And at this point, I had been shipping products for 8 years. So I was like, oh, it's a good time, decent amount of experience, feel good. I feel like I can actually have a team now. And so I had this intentional conversation of hey, when there's an opening, when there's, how can we create a team or an opportunity for me? So he found the right opportunity for me. And I was able to make the switch into management. Now, let's take a minute to talk about kind of the different ways that one can make a switch to management. So I think, and it doesn't have to be just one of these, it could be a combination of these. So there's an opportunistic switch, which for me, I would say is when I was at Palm. I was definitely not the most senior, tenure, questionable. There's definitely no intention of switching. And so it just became hey, do you want to do this? Sure, let's do this. I realized that wasn't the right time for me. And then there is seniority. So you're the most experienced person on the team. And so as the team grows, it's like, oh, it makes sense for this person to become a manager or a lead. And then there's tenure, the person who has the most, not necessarily the most senior, but the person who has the most historical knowledge. And then where I think is the most value is intentional planning. So this is where, like, as you're having career conversations with your manager on like, what does my year look like, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And at some point, how do I make that transition from having maybe an intern to 1 to 2 designers to having a bigger team? So when I switched to management at Uber, I started with 2 designers and then eventually went to 4. And some of the things that I was thinking about and worrying about at this point was losing my craft. I was like, I got a lot of joy still out of, and a lot of fulfillment from like taking a problem statement and then going through the process and creating like a prototype and selling it to leadership. I still got a lot of joy out of that. And so I had talked to my manager at the time. I was like, can I just have like 2 designers and then still do design work? She was like, sure, you can do that. But she knew that it would become very, very difficult. And that's exactly what happened. I had less and less time for design work because of the management work that was involved with even having a team of 2. And so at this point, since it was my second time going into management, these were some of the questions that I had in my mind was, what type of manager do I want to be? So I started thinking about past managers, the good, the great, the not so great. And also, how can I maximize my team's efforts when they work together? And most importantly, am I getting more satisfaction and energy and joy out of supporting someone else's success than I would be producing something myself? And so if you notice from the first time manager to this time manager to the second time, my tone had changed. It was less about self-doubt and more of like, I know I'm going to succeed. Now, what kind of a manager do I become? So that leads me to where I'm at right now at Slack. So when I had felt like I had done what I needed to do at Uber and was looking for my next opportunity, none of the management opportunities that I was looking into really kind of like saying to me or like felt good. And I was still in the middle of my career, a few years of leadership management experience. And what really drew me to Slack was their philosophy on very senior ICs versus managers. And the way they think about it is that there's a spectrum of how much management and designing you're doing. So you could have a small team and you're still designing. And then as your team grows 4, 6, 8, you do less and less designing. You do designing in the way of critiques and strategic planning, but not in the actual process. And the expectation is that as a lead, you're still part of raising the quality bar. You're still looking at processes, looking to improve them and improve the way that the teams collaborate and how you develop products. And so I became a design lead for an area within the overall growth team. And again, there was intentionality from the beginning here, because when I joined Slack, I made it very clear that I want to get back into management, but I'm good doing the work right now. I didn't have a timeline and there's no promises made. But as a good manager will, they will take care of you and your interests and recognize that the current position you're in is just one chapter of the book that you're writing. So for me personally, it was a great, great move, mainly because I got to get into the weeds and really understand what it took to be successful on a growth team. I had never worked on a growth team before. Definitely different challenges that go on there in terms of experimentation and quickly iterating. And so that gave me a great perspective and empathy for the challenges that the designers will face in this area. So when the team had grown to a certain size, I made the transition back to management. And honestly, it felt right at home. And this was, if you're keeping track, the 3rd time that I was switching to management. So I was no longer a first-time manager. There's no self-doubt. I knew the type of manager that I wanted to be. I wanted to be the manager that was empathetic, that was investing as much time in an individual's career as they are investing in their own career. And I was starting to tackle different types of challenges. And I would say at this point, I think it's safe to say that I'll continue on the management track, but you never know. So as I was reflecting on my journey for this talk, I was wondering if there was some sort of an artifact that I could make that could help each of you make the decision on when to switch. And what better way to make a decision than using a flow chart. I just couldn't help myself. So I have the end all be all flow chart to determine when you should switch to management or stay on the IC track. And I know it's a little difficult to look in here, so I will switch over to FigJam. And hopefully everyone thumbs up, you can see this. Yes, okay, awesome. Okay, so let's go through this flow chart together. Okay, so first question, have you thought about switching to management? Well, like good designers, let's go through the happy path first, and then we can figure out all the edge cases. So yes, I've thought about management. Okay, do you have a decent amount of experience shipping high quality products? That's subjective, so decent amount of experience, whatever that means to you, shipping high quality products, again, whatever that means to you. So let's say yes. Have you led teams or individuals as an IC? Yeah, I have actually. I've had an intern, I have multiple interns. Okay, so yes. And did you enjoy it? Yes, I did. So now here's the question. Are you ready to focus on building people more than building products? And if the answer is yes, then it's time to switch to management. Now let's go back, because not everything is the happy path. And I'm guessing a lot of you are here because you've thought about it, hopefully. So if you haven't thought about switching management, I'd say, why don't you stay on the IC track until you do, until it starts crossing your mind, which maybe this talk will inspire you to think about it. Okay, so do you have a decent amount of experience shipping high quality products? No. I would suggest you continue honing your craft and foundational skills as an IC. So let's go down here. So have you led teams, individuals as an IC? No. Well, I would suggest you talk to your manager about mentoring or managing an intern or a junior designer to start understanding what some of those skills are of having someone, being accountable for someone's work. Okay, so now let's go. I would consider this a little more of the fun stuff. So did you enjoy it? No. Ooh, okay. Why did you not enjoy it? Well, let's see. You don't enjoy all parts of it. Well, that's life. There are some things about management that you might not enjoy. So what I would suggest is you focus more on what you do enjoy and less of what you don't. And I'll give you a good example of this. I've had plenty of managers that are a lot more craft heavy than career and team heavy or culture heavy. So they'll focus a lot more on just like elevating my work and less about like team activities and bonding and career growth, and more just like you grow by doing the work. So I can appreciate that type of manager. And then there's other managers that focus a little more on team culture, making sure that you are doing the work that is satisfying you and bringing you a lot of energy. And so you can, as a manager, you can figure out where you want to spend more of your time. Okay, so too many meetings. Ooh, hear that a lot. Well, the key here is that most of the work that managers do happens in meetings. Strategic planning in a meeting, career conversations in a meeting, critiques in a meeting. A lot of the work of being a manager happens in meetings. And so it's important to recognize that. Not to say that managers don't need dedicated focus time, they do. But a lot of the collaboration happens in meetings. Okay, the last one, I miss designing. I was hesitant to put this here, but I would say stick to the IC track for now. And then once you get to the point where you're thinking about management again, but you'd be okay letting go of some of the work, then that might be the right time to switch. Okay, so now let's go down this path and finish this off. So are you ready to focus on building people more than building products? Kinda. So then I would suggest look for a hybrid role or leading a small team where you can still, where you're still responsible for some of the work. And if the question is flat, no, continue on the IC track until designing products has, I guess, filled up your bucket and you're happy with that. Okay, so to wrap up, at the beginning, we talked about thinking of your career as a book. So think about the current chapter that you're writing right now. Is it the beginning? Is it the middle? Is it the end? Well, maybe if it's the end, what will the next chapter be focused on? Is it going to be focused on building products or building people, or maybe both? But remember that we're writing our own book. So if you take a wrong turn, we circle back, just like I have done plenty of times in my career so far. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adil. So now we will go to the exciting part of today, which is Q&A. So let me just make sure that I pin myself as well, so that I'm moderating this right. Okay. Cool. So our team will be sending out a Q&A pigeonhole. So if you have any questions, please do fill up in the Q&A. And there's a lot of questions as well by the community. So if there's any similar questions, do vote for them on pigeonhole itself. We'll be directly taking questions from there. Awesome. So let's get started. Thanks, Adil, first of all, for your amazing presentation. I especially love the part about the Big Jam one. So definitely going to replay that and see everything. And if you want, let's coordinate offline as well. We could share some of these slides with the community here that has spent some time together this evening. All right, so we're going to move on to the first question, which is by K. Let me just put this at active. What support did you receive from your manager to grow into management? How did you conduct those meetings?
Good question. So when I first switched into management, so that first time, there wasn't that much support. And I don't know if that prevented me from continuing down that track now that I think about it. It was kind of just like I was like left on my own, and I was looking at other managers on the team that were doing a great job with their team, kind of like looking at them as like the way they conduct themselves and how do they plan, and what are the conversations that they're having. But on the second time that I switched, when I was at Uber, that was fantastic because and even at Slack, because when I made that switch, both of those managers outlined what the expectations were for me in this new role, and not just like what the expectations, like more of the transitional expectations of like, okay, you're doing this now, you're going to have a team, and so what areas to focus on, who to build relationships with, what conversations to be part of, what meetings to be part of. And so that really helped me be successful in both the second and the third time. And
Thanks.
I guess I'll just add in one more thing about the conducting. How did I conduct those meetings? So one of the things that we did is that with both of them is, and things that I've done as well, is as I'm doing my one-on-ones, let's say I have weekly one-on-ones, at least once a month, that one-on-one with someone on my team or my manager will be solely focused on career. And so that really helps me either take my current role to the next level or figure out how to make that switch. And so you're constantly having that conversation. So I would make the frequency very predictable on when you're having that conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that idea. I was just about to say that, like really good managers and I observe and I've worked with as well, they usually spend like a good time each week to talk about your career and to really like reflect, whether it be weekly or monthly, and to really reflect like, is what you're currently doing helping you grow into where you want to be in your career? And I think that's like always an important conversation. So everyone just take note, and if there's no conversation that takes place like that, you kind of want to take initiative as well on that. So thanks for that, Adil. All right, this is answered. Cool, something with 5 votes by Anonymous. As a manager, what do you show for the value you've created if you're no longer building a design portfolio?
That is very tough. But I guess, so if you're talking, or the people that are interested in this answer, but if you're building a design portfolio, that means you're interviewing or trying to make the switch from maybe one position, one company to another. And so what I've found successful in that, and what I've seen myself, is talking about the way that you've helped your team achieve their goals. For example, talking about someone on your team working on a project and it was going in a direction that is not going to be in line with the business goals, for example. And so what are steps that you took in order to course correct that project? That's just one example of like how you would talk about the value that you've created through your team without obviously taking credit for anything that they've done. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing with my team is as they're working through problems is actually designing with them. So like not all the time like getting to Figma and pixels and stuff, but like more of like, okay, are we solving the right use cases here? What are the primary use cases? Like, is this hypothesis what we're really going after? How are we interpreting the insights? And so when you start doing that, it's easier for you to like talk about the value that you created for a particular project without doing the work.
Thanks for that, Adil. And it reminded me of one thing that you mentioned earlier in the FigJam or during a presentation is, you kind of got to ask yourself if you're the type that want to see people succeed, or you prefer like making the impact yourself. And I think that's also like one of the things that, when you ask yourself the question, that's what you should also be presenting as well. So thanks for that, Adil. I'm gonna mark that as answered. So there's a question asking, how long were you a lead for before moving into management? And if I were to like add on like to that question as well, it's like, how long were you a lead for before moving to management? And when do you decide like it's the right time? And if there's a right time for that?
Yeah. So let's see. So at Uber, I was a lead for the rewards team for almost a year. And I would consider even when I would consider the time from when the design team on the rewards program went from 1 to 2. So when there's 2 of us, and I was leading, I would still consider myself a lead in that. And so from that time until I actually switched, I would say it was about a year. And so during that year, there was a lot of things that I talked about like establishing processes, establishing our design process. How do we delegate work between me and the other designer? How do we work with other teams? Like all those things, because we were a newly formed team within Uber. So it's like figuring out how do we do all of this stuff. It was pretty much like a startup, like a little company within a big company. Yeah, and then at Slack, I think I was a lead for maybe 7 months, 6 or 7 months. And to your question, Felix, of like, when do you know? So this is like going back to like having those, like as a lead, like having the conversations with your manager on like, do you want to continue being a lead? Which is totally fine. And, not all companies, but more and more companies are realizing that, there's a management track and there's an IC track and they run parallel. And they can run parallel, but the company needs to be set up that way. For example, at Slack, previously we had a VP level IC. Yes, we had a VP level IC who had like 1 or 2 reports, but the work that designer was doing was like working with like the C-suite, and he was an IC. And so he was like building designs and prototypes and mocks, but he didn't really manage a team. He just had a small team that was supporting him and his work. So yeah.
Well, that's really interesting actually, because I agree with what you say that the IC and management can run parallel. The company has to be set up that way. But most companies seem to have this perception, or like at least the ones that I've seen, is like the management always seems to be on top of that. So it doesn't really seem as parallel as you mentioned, but thanks for sharing that perspective. Yeah. So the next question, yeah, go for it. I
was gonna say, like, as people here, as you're like looking at companies, like I would be totally be direct and ask them, like, what is the management and IC track, and do they run parallel? Like, what is the ladder? So that that if you're joining a company, I mean, if you're joining a early startup, yes, they're not going to have ladders. You'll be able to help establish what those are. But if you're going to a medium-sized, large company, like if your goal is to get into management, or if there's a little bit of like interest in that, I would look at that, because Some companies, you go up to a certain, IC level, staff principal, and then it's like, oh, switch to management. Well, you need to start like down here, and maybe that's okay. It's based on how you feel about that. But there's a lot of companies that are like Uber. It was parallel. Slack, it's parallel. So
that's interesting. Yeah, we should set up more parallel structure in this case. That's definitely spreading the word. All right. The next question, which I think is a really good question, is how did you find your management style?
Oof. I think it was a combination of two things, I would say, or two buckets of things. So one, looking at, as you go through your career, you'll have managers, right? You'll go through a lot of managers. And so really understanding like what you like and don't like about that management style will really inform your own management style. Also, like understanding what your values are and how you bring those values into the workplace. And then the other thing that I don't know where I read this, in maybe a management book somewhere, but I find what really resonates with me in terms of my management style is like a cross between a coach and a parent. And I've been both, and I'm both of those things. And so it like really helps for me to think about, like, as a parent, I'm like trying to instill certain sort of values and work ethic. And then as a coach, I'm trying to teach, but not like give the answer. And as a parent, you want to like, you want your kids to have a better life than you, and have a more successful life. And so similarly, like I want my team to be more successful in design than I have been. And I would hope that if any of them go into management, that they also continue that. And so that's kind of like how I found my management style, is like looking at others and then like being really self-aware of the things that I value in life and relationships. Kind of how do I bring that to the workplace?
Thanks for sharing that. I have one, like, I would say like question while you were just sharing that. It's like, do you think that management is something that can be picked up fast, or do you think that some people just seem to have a talent or a knack for that? Have you seen like both sides of the coin?
I That's a hard question to answer. I don't think that there's like a knack for it. It's not like, I mean, we can go into a long debate of like whether it's like, you're kind of born as a manager or like that style. But I think, based on like how you want to manage, run, lead a team, there's probably an environment at a company that you'll be successful at. And so if there's a certain type of management style that you have that you really value and like, and you go to a company and it's like, oh, it's just like not working, you'll find another company where that will work. Because I don't think there's like any right way to manage. There's some core skills that I would like every manager to have, like empathy. But yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think we both laugh because empathy seems to be overused, but yes, 100%. So moving on to the next question, how do you know if you're doing a good job as a manager?
When you go through performance cycles, your team will give you feedback on how you're doing. And so that's one way, the feedback cycle at companies. I think that's probably so there's your own view of how you feel like you're doing, but you need to make sure that, you recognize that you have a team and you have a manager, and their point of view and their perspective is really, really important. And so I think that that's a really good way to gauge how you're doing as a manager, is getting feedback, and not just during performance reviews, but like constantly getting feedback from your team.
Awesome. Thanks for that idea. Do you think that it has to wait until like the performance review day? Because some companies do it monthly, some companies do it quarterly, if not annually as well. So do we have to wait until then, or is there, could such feedback be surfaced on those weekly one-to-ones?
Yeah, definitely on, more frequent. One of the designers that I have on my team that appreciate what this person does is proactively asks for feedback all the time. It's like, how am I doing? How am I doing? And it's great because then what that's doing to me is that I know this person is looking for the feedback. So as things happen, I'm like constantly sending feedback to this person proactively because I know this person wants it more regularly.
Right.
And so it doesn't have to be.
And do you still practice that yourself as a director? Do you still practice that yourself with maybe like the person that you're reporting to?
Sorry, say that again.
Do you still practice this instant and real-time feedback yourself with the manager that you're reporting to right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a little bit less frequent than like, giving feedback to my team, but that's something that definitely need to be better at. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Moving on to the next question by Paham. Hopefully I didn't butcher that name. What skills need to be improved to go from being an IC to a leader and a manager? What are some of the core skills that needs to be improved?
So one of them for sure is around how quickly you're able to build rapport with someone. So, you work with, everyone's going to work with like people with a lot of different backgrounds and experiences. And so being able to connect and like build these like genuine relationships, I think is going to be really important, because what happens is as you go from IC to lead to manager, the thing that you need to be really, really good at is influence. And at some companies, it comes with the authority of like being a manager. But in other places, it's not like that. And you really need to be able to build like really good relationships. And going back to, being able to build relationships and having empathy for the people that you're working with cross-functionally. I think it's really important that as you go from IC the leader to manager, that you're going to be working a lot more cross-functionally. So you'll be working with product managers and engineering managers a lot more. And so being able to understand like what are they trying to achieve with their team, and how can you help them achieve their goal? What is a product manager that you're working with? What are they being evaluated on? And how do you make sure that they're successful? And so that's where the empathy comes from, is like really understanding what the other person needs to be successful and how can you help.
All right, moving on. So I think we have time for 2 more questions. So we're just going to leave it at that. So the other question by Paham as well is, what kind of questions are asked in an interview for a design management job?
So one of the questions definitely is around how do you ensure the success of your team? So what are practices, what are rituals, what are things that you're doing in order to ensure that your team is working together and they're producing great outcomes? That would be one question. Another one is kind of going back to the previous question of like the skills, is like how do you build influence, or like what are some strategies that you use in order to make sure that the design work and the users are front and center? Like what are things that you do to make sure that your team has the space that it needs in order to do great design work? How do you shield your team from the feedback that's coming from all directions? Those are, I guess, some of the questions that come to mind for me. So it's more around like, how do you work cross-functionally and how do you work with your team? So like working down and working across, and also working upwards. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Adil. All right, we're going to move on to our last and final question. As a manager, you're looking for ways to improve your team members and further their career. Any thoughts on if a team member feels satisfied and motivated to further their seniority? If I were to maybe rephrase that question is, what are your thoughts on a team member that feels satisfied in what they're doing, but just doesn't want to further continue in terms of like promotion wise. You know, have you ever faced that instances? How do you deal with people like that? Do you let them stay as where they are, or would you encourage them to move up the ladder?
Yeah, great last question. So I think that there are two ways you can think about how someone on your team wants to continue forward. So one is, you can think of it as they want to maintain or they want to grow. And different points in your career and your life could mean that you just want to maintain. You just want to stay at where you're at, maybe because there are life obligations, you really aren't like, I don't know if it's just the, if it's just the lack of motivation or if it's just different priorities. And so sometimes I think it's totally fine for anyone to be in the maintain mode and not always be in the growth mode, because like growth mode takes a lot of energy out of you. And this like constant push to just keep going and going and going can lead to burnout, and it's not necessarily sustainable. So it's, I kind of think of it as like, if you're, for example, if you're a designer that's going from like a senior role to a staff role, let's see if that's what the levels are. So you might be like in growth mode and like really pushing yourself, working on high impact projects. And then you get to that staff level and now you're like, well, now I'm like, I don't want to get to the next level right away. Like, I want to maintain, I really want to like settle into this, and that's totally fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think the question would be is to really dive a little deeper with the team to understand, or with the individual, is to understand like what is it that that they are really going to get value out of right now? Is it just maintaining, or do they really want to be growing?
Thanks for that, Adil. We've come to the end of today's session, and thank you all so much for being a part of this. And before that, just before everyone hop off, I have one last question for you. Not really a question, but what advice would you give everyone here who is thinking about management as their next step within the next 1 year or within this year itself? What should they be really thinking about at this point of time? Can you hear me, Adil?
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah.
Sorry, I totally missed it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the question for you is, if someone on this call is looking to step into the management role as soon as this year, by December, what kind of advice would you give them, to get them started right now or get them preparing?
So definitely have the conversation with your manager and let them know what your plans are, that this is what you'd like to do. And what is the path that they can help you carve out in order to get there, whether that's going from IC to lead or lead to manager. And a lot of it also has to do with like the size of the company, and if there's a business, if there's like an opportunity. So sometimes there isn't an opportunity and you have to wait it out, but at least having the conversation right now of like, this is what you want to do, will go a long ways. Just like putting your intention out there and like talking to your manager about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adil. And with that, we'll wrap up today's session. Thank you all so much for joining, and you will also receive an email regarding the copy of today's session, the recording of today's session, and we'll see you very soon at the next Slack session. And remember, the next Slack session will be the finale session between ADPList and Slack. But we look forward to a series 2 with everyone here. So thank you all so much, and see you all next month for the one with Slack. Thank you.
Thank you.